The crystal chandeliers of Piton Manor cast their golden light over 300 of England's most distinguished guests, but none of their brilliance could illuminate the shadow where Isidora Vale sat forgotten. At 22, she possessed a quiet beauty that should have made her the center of attention. Auburn hair that caught fire in candlelight, emerald eyes that held depths of intelligence and sensitivity, and a grace that spoke of gentle breeding despite her modest circumstances. Yet here she was, relegated to the furthest corner of the grand ballroom, watching her cousin's wedding celebration unfold like a magnificent play in which she had no role to perform. The irony was not lost on her. She was family, invited by obligation rather than affection, present but invisible, included yet utterly alone. For 3 hours she had watched the Tun's elite dance, laugh and feast, while she remained as unnoticed as the wallpaper behind her chair. She had resigned herself to enduring the evening in solitude, counting the minutes until propriety would allow her to slip away unnoticed when everything changed with 6 simple words. Duke Vincent Alaric, the most powerful, feared, and sought-after man in all of England, appeared beside her table like a force of nature, his steel-gray eyes finding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Without invitation or explanation, he leaned down and spoke in a voice that carried the authority of centuries of noble blood. "Stay close to me." In that instant, every conversation in the ballroom ceased. Every fan stopped fluttering, and every eye turned toward the forgotten girl who had just been claimed by the most dangerous duke in the realm. What followed would not only transform Isidora's life forever, but would challenge every assumption London society held about power, protection, and the unexpected places where love can bloom when least expected and most desperately needed. Lady Isidora Vale smoothed the skirts of her emerald silk gown for the 100th time that evening, a nervous habit she had developed during the countless social gatherings where she found herself perpetually overlooked. The dress was beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful thing she owned, but it felt like armor that provided no protection against the casual cruelty of London society. From her corner table at the edge of the ballroom, she watched her cousin Evangeline's wedding celebration with a mixture of genuine happiness for the bride and deep melancholy for her own circumstances. Evangeline looked radiant in her ivory silk and Belgian lace, dancing with her new husband while surrounded by well-wishers and admirers. It was exactly the kind of fairy tale ending that Isidora had long ago stopped believing could happen to someone like her. "More wine, miss?" asked a passing footman, the first person to acknowledge her presence in over an hour. "Thank you," Isidora replied softly, grateful for even this small interaction. The servant's kindness was more attention than she had received from any of the wedding guests, despite being related to the bride. The truth was that Isidora existed in a peculiar limbo within London society. Her father had been the youngest son of a baron, which gave her just enough breeding to be invited to events like this. But he had died when she was 16, leaving her with little more than a modest inheritance and a distant connection to her more prosperous relatives. Her mother had remarried within a year, a practical arrangement with a merchant who had no interest in his new wife's daughter, and Isidora had found herself essentially orphaned while both parents still lived. She lived now in a small house in an unfashionable part of London, surviving on the income from her father's investments and the occasional charity of relatives who remembered her existence when it suited their purposes. She was invited to family events out of obligation, seated at the least desirable tables, and generally treated as a necessary inconvenience rather than a welcome guest. Isidora? The sharp voice of her aunt, Lady Margaret Peaton, cut through her reverie. "What are you doing sitting there by yourself? You look positively morose." "I'm enjoying the celebration, Aunt Margaret," Isidora replied diplomatically, though they both knew this was far from the truth. "Well, you won't find a husband hiding in the corner like a wallflower," Lady Margaret said, with the casual cruelty that seemed to be her specialty. "Though I suppose at your age and with your circumstances, the prospects are rather limited." Isidora felt the familiar sting of her aunt's words, but had long ago learned not to respond to such provocations. "I'm quite content as I am," she said quietly, "content to be a spinster living on charity." Lady Margaret's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. My dear girl, contentment is a luxury you can't afford. You need to be more strategic in your approach to these gatherings. Before Isadora could formulate a response, Lady Margaret had already moved on to greet more important guests, leaving her niece to contemplate the harsh reality of her situation. At 22, Isadora was indeed approaching the age where society would begin to consider her a confirmed spinster. Her modest dowry and lack of powerful connections made her an unattractive prospect for most gentlemen of her class, while her breeding made her unsuitable for anyone beneath it. She had received a few offers over the years, mostly from fortune hunters who mistakenly believed she had more money than she actually possessed, or from much older widowers looking for a young wife to manage their households and raise their existing children. She had declined them all, preferring independence to a marriage based on desperation or convenience. Miss Vale, a gentle voice interrupted her brooding, and Isadora looked up to see Lady Catherine Whitmore, one of the few people at the gathering who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Lady Catherine, Isadora said, rising to curtsy. How lovely to see you. And you, my dear, I was just telling my husband what a shame it is that you're sitting here all alone. Such a beautiful young woman should be dancing, not hiding in the shadows. I'm perfectly content to observe, Isadora replied, though she appreciated Lady Catherine's concern. The dancing is quite lovely to watch. Nonsense, Lady Catherine said firmly. Come, let me introduce you to some of the younger gentlemen. Lord Peaton's nephew is here from Scotland, and I believe he's unattached. Isadora allowed herself to be led toward a group of young men who were discussing horses and hunting with the enthusiasm that seemed to consume most of their waking hours. Lady Catherine made the introductions with genuine warmth, but Isadora could see immediately that the gentlemen in question were merely being polite. Their eyes slid past her almost immediately, seeking more interesting or advantageous company. Miss Vale, said Lord Peaton's nephew, a sandy-haired young man with kind but unremarkable features. Are you enjoying the celebration? Very much, Isadora replied, though she could see he was already looking over her shoulder at someone else. The conversation continued for a few minutes in the stilted way of social obligations, with each participant saying what was expected while thinking of other things entirely. When Lady Catherine was distracted by another acquaintance, the young men politely excused themselves, leaving Isadora standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, somehow more conspicuous and uncomfortable than she had been at her corner table. She made her way back to her seat, cheeks burning with embarrassment and the familiar ache of rejection. This was why she preferred to remain invisible, at least when no one noticed her. She couldn't be actively dismissed or rejected. As the evening wore on, Isadora found herself studying the other guests with the detached observation of someone who had learned to find entertainment in watching rather than participating. She noticed the subtle power plays between the matrons, the way young ladies positioned themselves to catch the attention of eligible bachelors, and the complex dance of social hierarchy that governed every interaction. It was during this observation that she first noticed him. Duke Vincent Alaric stood near the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by a circle of admirers and supplicants, who seemed to hang on his every word. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding, tall, dark, and possessed of an aura of barely contained power that made other men seem diminished in comparison. He was perhaps 35 years old, with black hair and steel-gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and the kind of aristocratic features that spoke centuries of noble breeding. Isadora knew his reputation. Of course, everyone in London knew about the Duke of Alaric. He was one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, with vast estates in the north and investments that spanned the globe. He was also notoriously difficult to approach, famously uninterested in the social games that consumed most of the tongue and completely immune to the machinations of ambitious mothers seeking advantageous matches for their daughters. There were darker rumors as well, whispers about his involvement in matters of state security, suggestions that he served the crown in ways that were never discussed in polite society. Some said he was dangerous, others claimed he was simply ruthless in business and politics. What everyone agreed upon was that he was not a man to be trifled with. As Isidora watched, she saw several young ladies attempt to engage the Duke in conversation, only to be dismissed with polite but unmistakable finality. He seemed bored by the entire gathering, participating only because social obligation demanded it, and clearly counting the minutes until he could make his escape. Magnificent, isn't he? The voice belonged to Lady Peaton's daughter, Clarissa, who had appeared beside Isidora's table with two of her friends in tow. "I beg your pardon," Isidora said, startled from her observation. "The Duke of Alaric," Clarissa said with a dreamy sigh. "Every unmarried woman in London has set her cap for him, but he's completely untouchable. They say he's never shown the slightest interest in any lady, no matter how beautiful or well-connected. Perhaps he simply hasn't found the right person," Isidora suggested mildly. Clarissa and her friends laughed as if this were the most amusing thing they had ever heard. "Oh, my dear Isidora," Clarissa said with condescending sweetness, "you're so romantic. Men like the Duke don't marry for love. They marry for political advantage or to secure their succession, and when he does choose a bride, it will be someone with impeccable bloodlines and a substantial dowry, not some penniless relation sitting in the corner." The casual cruelty of the remark hit Isidora like a physical blow, but she managed to maintain her composure. "Of course," she said quietly, "I was merely making an observation." "Well, observe all you like," Clarissa said, already losing interest in the conversation. "But don't waste time on impossible dreams. Come, girls, I want to position myself near the Duke when the next dance begins." As the three young women fluttered away in a rustle of silk and giggles, Isidora felt the familiar weight of her isolation settle around her like a cloak. Clarissa was right. Of course, men like the Duke of Alaric existed in a completely different sphere from someone like her. She might as well dream of flying to the moon as imagine herself worthy of his notice. She was contemplating making her excuses and leaving early when the unthinkable happened. A shadow fell across her table, and Isidora looked up to find herself staring into the steel-gray eyes of Duke Vincent Alaric himself. Up close, he was even more imposing than she had imagined, tall enough that she had to crane her neck to meet his gaze, with features that were harsh but undeniably handsome, and in presence that seemed to command the very air around him. "Miss Vale," he said in a voice like dark velvet, and Isidora felt her heart stop at the realization that he knew her name. "Your Grace," she managed to whisper, starting to rise from her chair. "Please remain seated," the Duke said, and to her amazement he pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. "I hope you don't mind the company." Isidora was so shocked she could barely form words around them. She could feel the attention of the entire ballroom focusing on their table like a spotlight. Conversations faltered, fans stopped fluttering, and every eye in the room turned toward the impossible sight of the Duke of Alaric sitting beside the forgotten girl in the corner. "I, of course, not your Grace," Isidora stammered. "But surely you have more important people to speak with." "Do I?" the Duke asked, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her pulse race. "I find myself quite tired of important people this evening. They're also predictably tedious." "I'm afraid I may be equally tedious," Isidora said, trying to regain some semblance of composure. "Somehow I doubt that," Vincent replied, and there was something in his tone that made her believe he was genuinely interested in her response. "Tell me, Miss Vale, what do you think of this celebration?" It was such an unexpected question that Isidora found herself answering honestly instead of offering the polite platitudes that social convention demanded. "I think it's beautiful," she said slowly. "Evangeline looks radiant, and her happiness is infectious. But I also think it's rather like watching a play. Magnificent to observe, but somehow unreal." "Unreal in what way?" "Everyone is performing," Isidora explained, warming to the subject despite her nervousness. "Playing roles that society has assigned them, saying what's expected rather than what they actually think or feel. It's beautiful, but it's also hollow." Vincent's eyes sharpened with what looked like genuine interest. "And you? Are you performing as well?" "I suppose I am," Isidora admitted, though my role seems to be that of the invisible observer, which requires less acting than most. "Invisible," Vincent repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I can see how you might feel that way. But I wonder if you've considered that invisibility might sometimes be a choice rather than an imposition." What do you mean? I mean that there's safety in being overlooked, isn't there? No expectations to meet, no disappointments to endure, no risks to take, but also no opportunities for genuine connection or meaningful experience. Isadora stared at him, amazed by the perceptiveness of his observation. You speak as if you have experience with invisibility yourself, your grace. In a way I do, Vincent said with a slight smile that transformed his harsh features, though my invisibility is of a different sort. People see the title, the wealth, the power, but they rarely see the man beneath. In that sense, we may have more in common than you might think. Before Isadora could respond to this extraordinary statement, she became aware that their conversation was attracting even more attention. She could see Lady Margaret approaching with a determined expression, flanked by several other matrons, who clearly intended to interrupt whatever was happening at the corner table. Vincent must have noticed as well, because he suddenly stood and extended his hand to her. "Miss Vale," he said in a voice that carried clearly across the ballroom, "would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" The request hit the gathered crowd like a thunderbolt. Isadora heard several audible gasps, and she was certain that Lady Margaret had actually stumbled in shock. The Duke of Alaric, who had refused every dance invitation of the evening, was asking the forgotten girl in the corner to partner him. Your Grace, I'm not certain that would be appropriate," Isadora said, acutely aware of the scandal such a dance would cause. "Why would it not be appropriate?" Vincent asked, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. "You're a lady, I'm a gentleman, and this is a wedding celebration. What could be more appropriate than dancing?" "Your Grace," Lady Margaret's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Surely you don't mean to." "I mean to dance with Miss Vale," Vincent said without taking his eyes off Isadora's face. "Unless, of course, she prefers to decline." The challenge in his words was unmistakable, and Isadora realized that this was a moment that would define not just her evening, but possibly her entire future. She could refuse, retreat back into her safe invisibility, and spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. Or she could take his hand and step into whatever consequences awaited. "I would be honored to dance with you, Your Grace," she said, placing her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, Isadora felt something electric pass between them, a connection that seemed to transcend the mere physical contact. Vincent's hand was warm and strong, and when he helped her to her feet, she felt as though she was rising not just from her chair, but from the shadows that had defined her entire existence. As he led her onto the dance floor, Isadora was acutely aware of every eye in the ballroom following their progress. The orchestra, seeming to sense the momentous nature of the occasion, struck up a waltz, the most intimate of dances, requiring partners to hold each other close and move as one. "Stay close to me," Vincent murmured as he placed his hand on her waist, and Isadora felt those words resonate through her entire being like a promise of protection and belonging. As they began to move together across the polished floor, Isadora realized that her life had just changed forever. The invisible girl who had spent the evening watching from the shadows was now dancing in the arms of the most powerful man in England, and there would be no going back to the safety of obscurity. Whatever came next, she would face it in the light with the steel-gray eyes of Duke Vincent Alaric watching over her, and his voice echoing in her memory. "Stay close to me, the protection of a duke." The waltz seemed to last both forever and no time at all. Isadora had never been held so close by a man, had never felt the intoxicating combination of strength and gentleness that Vincent displayed as he guided her through the intricate steps. He was an excellent dancer, confident, graceful, and completely in control, and she found herself following his lead with an ease that surprised her. "You dance beautifully," Vincent murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Thank you, Your Grace," Isadora replied, though she was certain her cheeks were burning with embarrassment at the attention they were receiving. "Though I fear we're causing quite a stir." "Let them stir," Vincent said dismissively. "Their opinions matter far less than you might think." Easy words for a duke to say, Isadora observed with more boldness than she usually possessed. "Your position protects you from the worst of society's judgments." "Does it?" Vincent asked, spinning her gracefully before drawing her close again. I think you'll find that power brings its own vulnerabilities, Miss Vale. The higher one rises, the further there is to fall. As the music swirled around them, Isadora found herself studying Vincent's face, trying to understand what had motivated him to single her out. His features were stern but not unkind, and there was something in his gray eyes that suggested depths she couldn't begin to fathom. Your Grace, she said carefully, may I ask why you chose to dance with me? Surely there were many more suitable partners available. Suitable in what way? Vincent counted. More beautiful? I think not. More intelligent? Highly unlikely. More genuine? Impossible? More appropriate to your station? Isadora said quietly. Ah, Vincent said, his eyes gleaming with something that might have been amusement. You mean more advantageous politically, or more likely to enhance my social standing? Tell me, Miss Vale, do you think I need enhancement? Of course not, Your Grace. But then, perhaps I chose to dance with you simply because I wanted to, Vincent interrupted gently. Perhaps I found your honesty refreshing after an evening of calculated conversations and transparent flattery. The waltz was drawing to a close, and Isadora felt a pang of regret that this magical interlude was ending. As Vincent led her through the final turns, she was acutely aware that returning to reality meant facing the consequences of what had just happened. Your Grace, she said as the music faded, I should return to my table now. Should you? Vincent asked, making no move to release her. Or would you prefer to take some air? The terrace is quite lovely in the moonlight. The suggestion was scandalous. An unmarried lady did not go onto a terrace alone with a gentleman, especially not with someone as notorious as the Duke of Alaric. But something in Vincent's manner suggested that this was less an invitation than a necessity. I think some air would be lovely, Isadora heard herself say. Vincent offered her his arm and led her through the crowd toward the French doors that opened onto the manor's terrace. As they walked, Isadora could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, could hear the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London would be buzzing with speculation about what had transpired between the Duke and the nobody from the corner table. The terrace was indeed beautiful, bathed in silver moonlight, and fragrant with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Vincent led her to a stone balustrade overlooking the gardens, where they could speak privately while remaining visible to anyone who might look out from the ballroom. Miss Vale, Vincent began, his voice serious, I need to warn you that your life is about to become considerably more complicated. Because I danced with you? Isadora asked, though she suspected the answer was more complex than that. Because I chose to dance with you, Vincent corrected. There's a significant difference. By singling you out, I've made you the subject of intense speculation, and I'm afraid considerable jealousy. I understand that, Your Grace, but surely the interest will fade once people realize that nothing significant has occurred between us. Vincent was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the moonlight. Miss Vale, Isadora, may I speak frankly with you? Of course. Something significant has occurred between us, whether you realize it or not. The moment I sat down at your table, you became a person of interest to everyone in that ballroom. Some will be curious, others will be envious, and a few will be actively hostile. Isadora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. There are ladies in there who have spent years trying to capture my attention, Vincent explained grimly. Mothers who have invested fortunes in gowns and jewels and elaborate schemes to put their daughters in my path. They will not look kindly on a young woman who achieved in one evening what they have failed to accomplish despite years of effort. But I didn't achieve anything, Isadora protested. You asked me to dance, I accepted. That's hardly a conquest, isn't it? Vincent asked, moving closer to her. Isadora, I have not danced with anyone in 3 years. I have not shown the slightest personal interest in any lady since I inherited my title. Tonight, I not only danced with you, but I sought you out specifically. In the eyes of society, that is indeed a conquest. Isadora felt her heart sink as the implications of his words became clear. You're saying that I'm now a target? I'm saying that you're now under my protection, Vincent replied firmly, which is why I brought you out here. I needed to explain the situation and offer you a choice. What kind of choice? You can return to your previous life, retreat to your little house, avoid society gatherings, and hope that the interest in you fades over time. It might work, though there's no guarantee that certain vindictive individuals won't pursue you anyway. Or you can stay close to me as I suggested earlier. Accept my protection openly. Allow me to ensure your safety and your reputation and face whatever comes with the full weight of my support behind you. Isadora stared at him in amazement. Your Grace, what you're suggesting, it would be tantamount to a courtship. The scandal would be manageable, Vincent interrupted. Isadora, I'm not suggesting anything improper. I'm offering you my protection and my escort to social functions. Nothing more. At least nothing more unless and until you might wish it to be more. But why? Isidora asked desperately. Why would you do this for someone you barely know? Vincent was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face as if trying to decide how much to reveal. Because he said finally, in 35 years of life, you are the first person I've met who sees me rather than my title. Because your honesty is like fresh air after years of breathing the stale atmosphere of calculated conversations. And because something in your eyes calls to something in my soul that I thought had died long ago. The raw honesty in his voice took Isadora's breath away. Your Grace, Vincent, he corrected gently. If you're going to accept my protection, you should at least use my given name when we're alone. Vincent, Isadora repeated, testing the name on her tongue. I don't understand any of this. This morning I was nobody, invisible and forgotten. Tonight you're offering me protection I never asked for against dangers I don't fully comprehend. It's like stepping into someone else's life. Perhaps it's stepping into the life you were always meant to have. Vincent suggested Isadora. I won't lie to you. Accepting my protection will bring challenges. There will be gossip, speculation, and attempts to undermine you. But there will also be opportunities you've never imagined, experiences you've never dreamed of, and the chance to discover what you're truly capable of when you're not hiding in the shadows. And if I refuse, then I'll escort you home tonight and ensure that you're left in peace, Vincent said simply. The choice is entirely yours. Isadora looked out over the moonlit gardens, her mind racing with the implications of both choices. She could return to her quiet, safe, lonely existence, or she could step into the unknown with this extraordinary man who had appeared in her life like a force of nature. If I accept, she said slowly, what would be expected of me? Nothing more than being yourself, Vincent replied, though I would ask that you trust me to guide you through the complexities of a world you haven't had to navigate before. Trust you, Isadora repeated thoughtfully. Vincent, I barely know you. Then perhaps it's time we remedied that, Vincent said with a slight smile. Isadora, I'm asking you to take a leap of faith, not just in me, but in yourself. You've spent years believing you're invisible, unremarkable, unworthy of notice. Tonight proved that none of those things are true. One dance doesn't prove anything, Isadora protested. One dance changed everything, Vincent countered. The question is whether you're brave enough to see where that change might lead. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching footsteps made them both turn toward the ballroom. Lady Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Isadora, she said sharply, you will come inside immediately. This behavior is completely inappropriate. Lady Pianton, Vincent said smoothly, moving slightly to position himself between Isadora and her aunt. Miss Vale and I were simply enjoying the evening air. Surely there's nothing inappropriate about that. Your Grace, Lady Margaret said, her voice tight with the effort of maintaining politeness. While I'm honored by your attention to my niece, I'm sure you understand that she is not. That is, her circumstances are quite different from what you might be accustomed to. Are they? Vincent asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made Lady Margaret step back. In what way precisely? She has no dowry to speak of, no connections of value, no prospects worthy of a man in your position, Lady Margaret said bluntly. Surely you can see that any association between you would be unsuitable. I see, Vincent said coldly, and you feel qualified to determine what is or isn't suitable for me. Your Grace, I meant no offense. Yet offense was given, Vincent interrupted. Lady Piton, let me be very clear about something. Miss Vale is under my protection now, Any slight offered to her will be considered a slight offered to me personally. I trust I make myself understood." Lady Margaret's face went white at the unmistakable threat in his words. "Of course, Your Grace. I apologize if I spoke out of turn." "You did," Vincent confirmed. "Now I believe you have other guests to attend to." After Lady Margaret retreated with obvious reluctance, Vincent turned back to Isadora, who was staring at him with a mixture of amazement and alarm. "You just declared me under your protection in front of my aunt," she said quietly. "There's no going back from that." "No," Vincent agreed. "There isn't. The question is whether you're prepared to move forward." Isadora looked into his steel-gray eyes and saw strength, determination, and something else, something that looked almost like hope. In that moment she realized that this extraordinary man was taking as much of a risk as she was. He was offering his protection to a woman with no connections, no dowry, and no social standing. If she proved unworthy of his trust, the damage to his reputation could be significant. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm prepared to move forward." "Then stay close to me," Vincent said, offering her his arm, "and trust that whatever comes next, we'll face it together." As they walked back into the ballroom, Isadora felt the weight of hundreds of stares and knew that her life had indeed changed forever. The invisible girl was invisible no more, and under the protection of Duke Vincent Alaric, she was about to discover just how bright the spotlight of society's attention could be. But with Vincent's strength beside her and his words echoing in her heart, she found she was no longer afraid of being seen. For the first time in her life, she felt worthy of the attention and ready to claim her place in a world that had always seemed beyond her reach. The Duke, who had chosen to see her when everyone else looked through her, had given her more than protection. He had given her the courage to finally step out of the shadows and into the light, navigating the storm. The morning after the wedding brought with it a deluge of calling cards, invitations, and barely concealed curiosity that left Isadora feeling overwhelmed and unprepared. Her modest house in Bloomsbury, which had always seemed perfectly adequate for her quiet existence, suddenly felt exposed and vulnerable under the scrutiny of London society. "Miss," said her housekeeper, Mrs. Hartwell, as she brought in the morning's correspondence, "there's been a steady stream of carriages passing by since dawn, and these invitations, I've never seen so many in one morning." Isadora looked at the silver tray, piled high with elegant cards, and felt her heart sink. Everyone represented a social obligation she wasn't prepared for, a conversation she didn't know how to navigate, and an opportunity to make mistakes that could reflect poorly on Vincent. "There's also this," Mrs. Hartwell added, holding out a sealed letter that bore the distinctive all-Alaric crest. It was delivered by a footman in ducal livery not an hour ago. With trembling fingers, Isadora broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. Vincent's handwriting was bold and decisive, much like the man himself. "My dear Isadora, I trust you slept well despite the excitement of the evening. I write to inform you that I will be calling at 2 this afternoon to discuss the practical aspects of the arrangement we discussed. I have taken the liberty of engaging a lady's companion for you, Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, a widow of impeccable reputation, who will help you navigate the complexities of your new position in society. Please do not concern yourself with the invitations you have undoubtedly received. We will review them together and determine which are worthy of your attention. Until this afternoon, I remain your devoted servant, Vincent." The letter was signed with a flourish that somehow managed to convey both authority and affection. Isadora read it twice, marveling at how Vincent had anticipated her needs and moved to address them before she had even fully understood what those needs might be. At precisely 2 p.m, Vincent's carriage arrived outside her modest home, causing quite a stir among her neighbors, who had never seen such an elegant equipage on their quiet street. Vincent himself appeared at her door, dressed in perfectly tailored morning attire that emphasized his commanding presence, accompanied by a distinguished woman of perhaps 50 years, who carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to moving in the highest circles. "Isadora," Vincent said as Mrs. Hartwell showed them into her small sitting room. "May I present Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield? Elenina, this is Miss Isadora Vale." Mrs. Whitfield was an elegant woman with silver-streaked brown hair and kind but shrewd blue eyes. She curtsied gracefully to Isadora, who found herself immediately impressed by the woman's poise and warmth. "Miss Vale," Mrs. Whitfield said in a cultured voice, "His Grace has told me so much about you. I'm delighted to make your acquaintance." "The pleasure is mine, Mrs. Whitfield," Isadora replied, though she was curious about what exactly Vincent had told this stranger about her. "Eleanor has agreed to serve as your companion and guide," Vincent explained as they settled into the sitting room's modest furnishings. "She's a widow with extensive experience in society, and she'll help you navigate the complexities of your new position." "New position?" Isadora asked, though she suspected she already knew what he meant. "As a lady under my protection, you'll be invited to events and gatherings that require a certain level of social sophistication," Vincent said gently. "Elenina will help ensure that you're prepared for whatever situations might arise." "Your Grace is too kind," Isadora said, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. "But surely the expense is mine to bear," Vincent interrupted firmly. "Isadora, if you're to move in my circles, you must be properly equipped to do so. That includes not just a companion, but appropriate clothing, jewelry, and whatever else might be necessary." "I couldn't possibly accept such generosity," Isadora protested, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "You could, and you will," Vincent said with gentle authority. "My dear, this isn't charity, it's necessity. If I'm to protect you properly, you must be beyond reproach in every aspect of your presentation to society." Mrs. Whitfield leaned forward with a sympathetic smile. "Miss Vale, I understand your reluctance to such assistance, but His Grace is quite right. In our world, appearance and presentation matter enormously. Allow me to help you navigate these waters with confidence." Over the next hour, Vincent and Mrs. Whitfield outlined a comprehensive plan for Isadora's transformation from invisible wallflower to a lady worthy of ducal protection. There would be new gowns from London's finest modistas, lessons in deportment and conversation, and careful coaching on the intricate rules of precedence and protocol that governed high society. "The most important thing to remember," Mrs. Whitfield explained, "is that you must never appear to be trying too hard. Confidence is key, even when you're uncertain. Society can sense desperation or insecurity from a mile away." "But what if I make mistakes?" Isadora asked anxiously. "What if I say the wrong thing or commit some terrible breach of etiquette?" "Then you'll learn from the experience and do better next time," Vincent said simply. "Isadora, perfection isn't expected. Authenticity is. Be yourself, but be the best version of yourself." As the afternoon progressed, they reviewed the mountain of invitations that had arrived that morning. Vincent was ruthless in his selections, dismissing most as either beneath Isadora's notice or potentially dangerous to her reputation. "Lady Peaton's soir tomorrow evening," he said, examining one particularly elaborate invitation. "Well, attend that one. It will give society a chance to observe you in my company and draw their own conclusions about the nature of our association." "What conclusions do you want them to draw?" Isadora asked. "That you're a lady of quality who has earned my respect and protection," Vincent replied. "Nothing more, nothing less." "And Lady Whitmore's musical on Thursday," Mrs. Whitfield added, studying another invitation. "That would be perfect for you, Miss Vale. Lady Whitmore is known for her appreciation of genuine talent and character rather than mere social position." As they planned Isadora's social calendar, she found herself marveling at the complexity of the world she was entering. Every invitation carried implications. Every acceptance or refusal sent a message, and every appearance would be scrutinized for clues about her relationship with Vincent. "It's rather like a chess game, isn't it?" she observed. "Every move has consequences that ripple outward." "Exactly," Vincent said, looking pleased by her insight. "And like chess, success depends on thinking several moves ahead and understanding your opponent's motivations." "Who are my opponents?" Isadora asked. "Anyone who sees your association with me as a threat to their own ambitions," Vincent replied grimly. "There are ladies who have spent years positioning themselves or their daughters for my attention. They won't appreciate being displaced by someone they consider an upstart." "Then perhaps this isn't wise," Isadora said, suddenly feeling the weight of what she was undertaking. "Perhaps I should withdraw before any real damage is done." The damage, as you call it, was done the moment I chose to dance with you, Vincent said firmly. Withdrawing now would only confirm their suspicions that you're unworthy of my attention. The only way forward is through, Mrs. E. Whitfield nodded in agreement. His Grace is quite right, Miss Vale. In society, retreat is often seen as admission of guilt or inadequacy. You must face this challenge with courage and dignity. But what if I fail? Isidora asked quietly. What if I prove unequal to the task? Vincent moved to sit beside her, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Isidora, you've already proven yourself more than equal to any challenge society might present. You've survived years of neglect and dismissal with your spirit intact. You've maintained your dignity in the face of casual cruelty. You've preserved your authenticity in a world that rewards artifice. If that isn't strength, I don't know what is. His words warmed something deep inside Isidora's chest, a part of her that had been cold and empty for so long she had forgotten it existed. You really believe that? I know it, Vincent said simply, and soon everyone else will know it too. The first test came sooner than expected. The next morning brought a visit from Lady Margaret, who arrived at Isidora's door in a state of barely controlled agitation. Is that Adora? She said without preamble as she swept into the sitting room. What have you done? Good morning, Aunt Margaret, Isidora replied calmly, grateful for Mrs. Whitfield's presence beside her. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play innocent with me, girl, Lady Margaret snapped. The entire ton is buzzing with speculation about you and the Duke of Alaric. Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? I danced with his Grace at your daughter's wedding, Isidora said evenly. Surely that's not cause for such distress. One dance has become something much more significant, and you know it, Lady Margaret replied. There are rumors that he's taken you under his protection, that he's been seen calling at this house, that he's planning to escort you to social functions. Is any of this true? Isidora felt Mrs. Whitfield's encouraging presence beside her and drew strength from it. His Grace has been very kind to me. Yes, kind. Lady Margaret's voice rose to a near shriek. Isidora, do you understand what you're risking? If this association ends badly, and it will end badly, you'll be ruined beyond redemption. No respectable family will receive you. No decent man will consider you for marriage, and you'll be left with nothing but scandal and shame. And if it doesn't end badly, Mrs. Whitfield interjected smoothly. What then, Lady Piton? Lady Margaret turned her attention to the older woman with obvious suspicion. And who might you be? Mrs. Elalina Whitfield, she replied with perfect composure. I'm serving as Miss Vale's companion during this exciting time in her life. Companion? Lady Margaret's eyes narrowed. Provided by whom? By His Grace, naturally, Mrs. Whitfield said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. He's very concerned with ensuring that Miss Vale is properly chaperoned and guided. This is worse than I thought, Lady Margaret muttered. Isidora, you must end this madness immediately. Send word to the Duke that you're grateful for his attention, but that you feel it would be best to return to your previous circumstances. No, Isidora said quietly, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. No, Lady Margaret stared at her in shock. What do you mean, no? I mean that I'm grateful for your concern, but I'm quite capable of making my own decisions about my future, Isidora replied, feeling strength flow through her with each word. His Grace has offered me his protection and guidance, and I've chosen to accept both. You foolish girl, Lady Margaret hissed. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The Duke of Alaric is not some romantic hero from a novel. He's a dangerous man with dangerous enemies. If you become entangled in his world, you'll be destroyed by forces you can't even comprehend. Then it's fortunate that I have such capable guidance, Isidora said, glancing at Mrs. Whitfield with genuine gratitude. Lady Margaret stared at her niece as if seeing her for the first time. You've changed, she said slowly. This isn't the timid little mouse who sat in the corner at Evangeline's wedding. No, Isidora agreed. It isn't. Perhaps that timid little mouse was never who I really was. After Lady Margaret departed in a huff of indignation and dire warnings, Mrs. Whitfield turned to Isidora with an approving smile. Very well done, my dear, she said warmly. You handled that beautifully. I felt like I was standing outside myself watching someone else speak, Isidora admitted. I've never stood up to Aunt Margaret before. Perhaps you've never had reason to before, Mrs. Knight Whitfield suggested. Sometimes we discover our strength only when we have something worth fighting for. And what am I fighting for? Isadora asked. Your right to choose your own path, Mrs. Whitfield replied simply. Your right to be seen and valued for who you truly are. Your right to a future that isn't limited by other people's expectations or prejudices. That evening, as Isadora prepared for Lady Piton's soir, her first public appearance as a lady under ducal protection, she found herself thinking about Mrs. Whitfield's words. For the first time in her life, she was fighting for something that belonged to her, something that no one else could give her or take away. When Vincent arrived to escort her to the soir, resplendent in evening attire that emphasized his commanding presence, Isadora felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with anticipation. You look beautiful, he said simply, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Thank you, Isadora replied, grateful for the new gown that Mrs. Whitfield had helped her select, a creation of deep sapphire silk that brought out the color of her eyes and complemented her auburn hair perfectly. Are you ready for this? Vincent asked as he helped her into his carriage. I think so, Isadora said, though her heart was racing with anticipation and anxiety. Remember, Vincent said as the carriage began to move through the London streets, you belong there as much as anyone else. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. As they approached the brilliantly lit mansion where Lady Piton's soir was in full swing, Isadora took a deep breath and prepared to face whatever awaited her. The invisible girl was about to make her debut in the spotlight, and with Vincent's strength beside her, she was ready to claim her place in a world that had always seemed beyond her reach. The Duke, who had chosen to see her when everyone else looked through her, had given her more than protection. He had given her the courage to finally step out of the shadows and discover who she was meant to be. Love's revelation. Lady Piton's soiree was a glittering affair that brought together the cream of London society in an elegant townhouse filled with music, laughter, and the subtle minations of the ton. As Vincent escorted Isadora through the receiving line, she was acutely aware of every whispered conversation that ceased upon their approach, every curious glance that followed their progress through the crowded rooms. Miss Vale, Lady Piton said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, how lovely to see you again, and your grace, what an honor to have you join us this evening. The honor is mine, Lady Piton. Vincent replied smoothly, your soirees are always among the season's finest gatherings. As they moved deeper into the party, Isadora noticed the way conversations shifted when they approached, how groups of people seemed to part before them like water before the prow of a ship. Vincent's presence commanded respect and attention wherever he went, and by extension that attention now included Clearthroat her. Your Grace, called a melodious voice, and they turned to see Lady Catherine Whitmore approaching with a warm smile. How wonderful to see you, and Miss Vile, you look absolutely radiant this evening. Thank you, Lady Catherine, Isadora replied, grateful for the genuine warmth in the older woman's greeting. You're very kind. Kindness has nothing to do with it, my dear. You're positively glowing, Lady Catherine said with a knowing look at Vincent. I do hope you'll both attend my musical on Thursday. I have a wonderful young pianist performing. Quite talented, though perhaps not as captivating as the company will be. We would be delighted, Vincent replied, and Isadora felt a thrill at his casual use of we, as if their partnership was already an established fact. As the evening progressed, Isadora found herself navigating conversations with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Mrs. Whitfield's coaching proved invaluable as she discussed literature with a group of blue stockings, shared observations about art with several collectors, and even held her own in a spirited debate about social reform with some of the more progressive members of society. You're a natural, Vincent murmured during a brief moment when they found themselves alone near the refreshment table. I've been watching you work the room, and you've impressed everyone you've spoken with. I feel like I'm playing a role, Isadora admitted. Though I suppose that's what all of this is, an elaborate performance. Is it? Vincent asked, his gray eyes studying her face intently. Or are you simply allowing people to see aspects of yourself that you've kept hidden for years? Before Isidora could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Lady Clarissa Paton, resplendent in a gown of pale pink silk that emphasized her blonde beauty. She was accompanied by two other young ladies whom Miss Dora recognized as prominent debutants of the current season. "Your Grace," Clarissa said with a curtsy that managed to be both respectful and subtly seductive. "What a pleasant surprise to see you here. And Miss Vale, how unexpected to see you again so soon." "Lady Clarissa," Vincent replied with polite coolness, "I trust you're enjoying your mother's gathering." "Oh, immensely," Clarissa replied, her blue eyes fixed on Vincent with obvious calculation. "Though I must confess, I'm curious about this sudden friendship between you and my cousin. It's all quite romantic, really, like something from a novel." "Is it?" Vincent asked, his tone carrying a subtle warning that made Clarissa's companions step back slightly. "Well, yes," Clarissa continued, either oblivious to the danger or determined to press forward regardless. The powerful Duke rescuing the poor relation from obscurity. It's the stuff of fairy tales, though I do wonder what will happen when the novelty wears off. "Clarissa," Isidora said quietly, finding her voice despite the deliberate cruelty of her cousin's words, "I think perhaps you misunderstand the nature of His Grace's kindness. Do I?" Clarissa's smile was sharp as a blade. "Forgive me, cousin, but I've known you all your life. You're a sweet girl, certainly, but hardly the type to hold the attention of a man like the Duke for very long. When he tires of this charitable impulse, where will that leave you?" The words hit his Adora like physical blows, confirming every fear she had harbored about her worthiness and the temporary nature of Vincent's interest. She felt her carefully constructed confidence begin to crumble, and she was certain that everyone in the room could see her humiliation. "Lady Clarissa," Vincent said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge that made several nearby conversations falter. "You seem to be laboring under several misconceptions that I feel compelled to correct." "Your Grace," Clarissa's confidence wavered slightly at his tone. "First," Vincent continued, stepping closer to Isidora in a gesture that was unmistakably protective, "my association with Miss Vale is not charity, novelty, or any other temporary amusement. It is a deliberate choice based on my recognition of her exceptional qualities. Of course, Your Grace, I didn't mean to suggest." "Second," Vincent interrupted smoothly, "your assumption that I might tire of Miss Vale's company reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and hers. I don't form attachments lightly, and when I do, they are not subject to the whims of fashion or the passage of time." Clarissa's face had gone pale, and her companions were looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Your Grace, I assure you, I meant no offense. And third," Vincent continued relentlessly, his gray eyes fixed on Clarissa with an intensity that made her shrink back, "your suggestion that Miss Vale is somehow unworthy of my attention is not only incorrect, but deeply insulting. She possesses more genuine intelligence, compassion, and strength of character than anyone else in this room, yourself included." The silence that followed Vincent's words was deafening. Every conversation in their immediate vicinity had ceased, and Isidora could feel dozens of eyes watching the confrontation with fascination and alarm. She had never seen anyone publicly humiliate a member of the Ton with such devastating precision, and the fact that Vincent had done it in her defense left her feeling both grateful and terrified. "I apologize if my words were misinterpreted," Clarissa stammered, her face now flushed with embarrassment and anger. "I was merely expressing concern for my cousin's welfare." "Your concern is noted and dismissed," Vincent replied coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Miss Vale and I have other people to speak with." As Vincent led Isidora away from the stunned group, she could hear the immediate explosion of whispered conversations that followed in their wake. By tomorrow morning, every drawing room in London would be buzzing with accounts of how the Duke of Alaric had publicly defended the nobody from the corner table. "Vincent," Isidora whispered as they moved toward a quieter corner of the room, "you shouldn't have done that." "The scandal will be forgotten in a week," Vincent interrupted firmly. "Isidora, I will not stand by and watch anyone insult you, regardless of the social consequences. You are under my protection, and that protection extends to your reputation and your dignity." But Clarissa was right about one thing. Isadora said quietly, her voice heavy with the doubts that her cousin's words had awakened. I am just a poor relation with no connections and no prospects. What happens when you realize that she was right about everything else as well? Vincent stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands gently grasping her shoulders. Isadora, look at me. She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing something in their gray depths that made her breath catch. Do you truly believe that I am the kind of man who would publicly defend someone I didn't value deeply? Vincent asked softly. Do you think I would risk my reputation and social standing for a mere whim or charitable impulse? I don't know, Isadora admitted. I don't understand why you've chosen to involve yourself in my life at all. Then perhaps it's time I explained, Vincent said, his voice carrying a note of decision that suggested he had been wrestling with this moment for some time. Isadora, what I'm about to tell you may shock you, but I need you to understand the truth of my feelings. Your feelings? Isadora's heart began to race at the implication of his words. I have been watching you for months, Vincent said quietly, his gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the rest of the room fade away. Long before Evangeline's wedding, long before our dance, I had noticed you at various social gatherings. You sat in your corners, invisible to everyone else. But I saw you. I saw your intelligence in the way you observed the people around you, your compassion in the way you treated servants and social inferiors, your strength in the way you endured neglect and dismissal with dignity and tact. Isadora stared at him in amazement. You knew. You noticed me before? I was fascinated by you, Vincent admitted. Here was a woman who possessed every quality I had ever hoped to find. Intelligence, kindness, authenticity, strength, and yet she was completely overlooked by a society that values only wealth and connections. I wanted to approach you, but I knew that any attention from me would thrust you into a spotlight you weren't prepared for. Then why did you approach me at the wedding? Because I couldn't bear to watch you suffer through another evening of being ignored and dismissed, Vincent said passionately. Because seeing you sit alone in that corner, beautiful and brilliant and completely unappreciated, broke something inside me that I hadn't even realized was whole. Because I reached a point where protecting you from society's attention seemed less important than protecting you from society's neglect. Vincent, Isadora whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. I'm in love with you, Isadora, Vincent said simply, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. I have been falling in love with you for months, watching you from across crowded rooms, admiring your grace under pressure, your kindness to those who couldn't benefit you, your refusal to compromise your principles for social advantage. When I asked you to dance, when I offered you my protection, it wasn't charity or novelty or any temporary impulse. It was love, pure and simple. The words hit Isadora like a physical force, leaving her breathless and reeling. You love me completely, Vincent confirmed desperately, irrevocably. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you and to everyone else that you are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. But I'm nobody, Isadora protested weakly, her mind struggling to process the magnitude of what he was telling her. I have nothing to offer a man like you. You have everything to offer, Vincent said firmly. You have a mind that challenges and delights me, a heart that inspires me to be better than I am, and a spirit that has survived years of adversity without becoming bitter or cynical. You have courage, compassion, and a strength that most people never develop because they're never tested the way you've been tested. Vincent, I know this is sudden, Vincent interrupted gently. I know you need time to process what I've told you, to decide whether you could ever feel for me even a fraction of what I feel for you. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Isadora. I'm simply asking you to consider the possibility that what we have between us could become something extraordinary. Before Isadora could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Whitfield, who approached with a subtle urgency that suggested she had been watching the confrontation with Clarissa and its aftermath. Miss Vale, Your Grace, she said quietly. Perhaps it would be wise to take some air. The terrace is lovely this evening, and it would provide an opportunity for private conversation. Vincent nodded gratefully at the older woman's discretion. An excellent suggestion, Isadora. Would you care to step outside for a moment? The terrace was indeed lovely, bathed in moonlight and fragrant with the scent of night-blooming flowers. More importantly, it was private, allowing them to continue their conversation away from the curious eyes and eager ears of the tongue. I need to ask you something, Isadora said once they were alone, her voice trembling with emotion. If you've been watching me for months, if you felt this way for so long, why didn't you approach me sooner? Why wait until that night at the wedding? Vincent was quiet for a moment, his hands gripping the stone balustrade as he stared out over the moonlit garden. Because I was afraid, he admitted finally. Afraid? You terrified? Vincent confirmed with a wrathful smile. Isadora, I'm 35 years old, and I've never been in love before. I've had relationships, certainly, but nothing that touched my heart the way you do. I was afraid that if I approached you too soon, if I thrust you into the spotlight of my attention before you were ready, I would destroy the very qualities that drew me to you in the first place. What changed your mind? Watching you suffer, Vincent said simply. Seeing you sit alone at that wedding, invisible and ignored, while women with half your intelligence and none of your character commanded the attention of every man in the room, I couldn't bear it anymore. I realized that my fear of damaging you was causing you damage anyway, and that if I truly loved you, I needed to be brave enough to act on that love. And now, Isadora asked softly, are you still afraid more than ever? Vincent admitted with a laugh that held no humor. Because now you know how I feel, and there's a chance, however small, that you might not feel the same way. The possibility of losing you is more terrifying than anything I've ever faced. Isadora studied his profile in the moonlight, seeing vulnerability in the strong lines of his face that she had never noticed before. This powerful, commanding man who could silence a room with a single look was afraid of her rejection, afraid that she might not be able to love him in return. Vincent, she said quietly, and he turned to look at her with an expression of such hope and fear that it took her breath away. I need you to know something, she continued, gathering her courage. When you asked me to dance at the wedding, when you said, stay close to me, it wasn't just my social situation that changed. Something inside me changed as well. For the first time in my life, I felt seen, valued, important, not because of what I could offer or what I represented, but simply because of who I was. Isadora, let me finish, she said gently. These past few days getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your strength and your unwavering principles, I found myself feeling things I never thought I was capable of feeling. You've awakened something in me that I didn't even know existed. What are you saying? Vincent asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying that I love you too, Isadora said simply. I love your integrity, your compassion, your willingness to stand up for what's right regardless of the consequences. I love the way you see people really see them instead of just looking at their titles or their wealth. I love the way you've made me feel worthy of love and respect and attention. Vincent's response was to pull her into his arms and kiss her with a passion that left no doubt about the depth of his feelings. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and trembling. Marry me, Vincent said urgently, his hands framing her face as he looked into her eyes. Isadora, marry me, and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. Yes, Isadora whispered, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. Yes, Vincent, I'll marry you. As they stood together on the moonlit terrace, holding each other close and planning a future that neither had dared to dream of just days before, Isadora marveled at the extraordinary turn her life had taken. The invisible girl, who had sat alone at a wedding feast, had found not just protection and attention, but the deepest love she had ever imagined possible. What will people say? She asked, though she found she cared less about society's opinion than she had expected. They'll say that the Duke of Alaric chose his bride wisely, Vincent replied with absolute confidence. They'll say that love conquered social convention, that merit triumphed over mere pedigree, and that sometimes the most extraordinary partnerships come from the most unexpected places. And if they don't, then they'll learn, Vincent said firmly, because you and I are going to build something together that will be impossible to ignore or dismiss. We're going to create a marriage based on love and respect and partnership, and we're going to use our combined strengths to make a difference in the world." As they returned to the soir to face whatever reactions their engagement might provoke, Isidora felt a confidence and joy that she had never experienced before. The Duke, who had chosen to see her when everyone else looked through her, had given her more than love. He had given her the courage to believe in herself and the strength to claim her rightful place in the world. Their love story would become legendary in London society, not just because of the dramatic circumstances of their meeting, but because of the genuine partnership they would build together. The invisible girl and the powerful Duke had found in each other not just love, but the perfect complement to their individual strengths and dreams. And as Vincent had predicted, society would indeed learn to see Isidora as he saw her, not as a poor relation who had captured a duke through luck or manipulation, but as a remarkable woman who had earned the love of an extraordinary man through the simple but powerful act of being authentically herself. The Duke who had said, "Stay close to me," had meant it as a promise of protection. But it had become something far more precious, a vow of eternal love and partnership that would transform both their lives and inspire everyone who witnessed the power of seeing and being seen for who they truly were. Love's triumph. The announcement of the Duke of Alaric's engagement to Miss Isidore Val sent shock waves through London society that reverberated for weeks. The morning papers were filled with speculation, drawing rooms buzzed with gossip, and every social gathering became an opportunity for the Ton to dissect and analyze this most unexpected union. "It's unprecedented," declared Lady Peaton to her circle of friends as they took tea in her elegant drawing room. A duke of his standing, with his wealth and influence, choosing a girl with no dowry, no connections, and no social significance whatsoever. "Perhaps that's precisely why he chose her," suggested Lady Catherine Whitmore with a knowing smile. "A man in the Duke's position doesn't need to marry for money or political advantage. He can afford to marry for love." "Love?" Lady Peaton scoffed. "Mark my words, this infatuation will fade, and then where will poor Isidora be? She'll be a duchess certainly, but a duchess without the breeding or training necessary to fulfill such a role properly." What Lady Peaton and her fellow critics failed to understand was that Vincent had no intention of allowing his bride to face the challenges of her new position without extensive preparation and support. In the weeks following their engagement, he surrounded Isidora with the finest tutors, advisors, and mentors that money and influence could provide. "Your Grace," said Madame Dubois, the French modiste who had been commissioned to create Isidora's wedding. "Trousseau, you have exquisite taste. These designs will showcase your natural beauty while establishing your position as a woman of impeccable style." Isidora stood on the fitting platform in Madame Dubois' exclusive salon, surrounded by bolts of the finest silks, satins, and laces that Europe could provide. The wedding gown alone was a masterpiece, ivory silk with intricate beadwork, and a train that would stretch 12 feet behind her as she walked down the aisle of St. George's, Hanover Square. "It's beautiful," Isidora said softly, studying her reflection in the mirror. "But perhaps a bit elaborate." "Nonsense," Mrs. Whitfield interjected from her seat nearby. "My dear, you're marrying one of the most powerful men in England. Your wedding will be attended by royalty, foreign dignitaries, and the cream of society. You must look the part of a duchess from the moment you say your vows." The transformation of Isidora Vala from invisible wallflower to duchess in waiting was remarkable to witness. Under Mrs. Whitfield's expert guidance, she learned the intricate protocols of precedence, the subtle art of conversation with foreign ambassadors, and the complex etiquette that governed interactions with members of the royal family. Remember, Mrs. Whitfield coached during one of their daily lessons. Confidence is key. You are not an impostor pretending to be a duchess. You are a woman of quality who has been chosen by a duke because of your exceptional character. Hold your head high and let your natural grace shine through. Vincent, meanwhile, was using his considerable influence to ensure that Isidora would be received with respect rather than skepticism. He hosted intimate dinner parties where she could meet and charm key members of society, arranged for her to be presented to influential political wives, and made it clear through both word and deed that any slight offered to his bride would be considered a personal insult to him. "Your Grace," said Lord Patan during one such gathering, "I must say, your bride-to-be is quite remarkable. Her conversation is intelligent, her manner is gracious, and her beauty is undeniable. I believe I owe you an apology for my initial skepticism." "No apology necessary," Vincent replied smoothly. "I understand that my choice was unexpected, but I hope that as people come to know Isidora, they'll understand why I consider myself the most fortunate man in England." The wedding preparations became a source of fascination for all of London. Every detail was scrutinized and discussed, from the guest list that included members of the royal family to the menu that would be served at the wedding breakfast. Vincent spared no expense in ensuring that the celebration would be worthy of his bride and his own elevated position. "The flowers alone will cost more than most people earn in a year," observed one society matron as she reviewed the elaborate plans. White roses, lies, and orange blossoms from the Duke's own hodus, arranged by the finest florists in London. "And the music," added another. "They've engaged the finest musicians in Europe. The ceremony will be accompanied by a full orchestra, and the reception will feature performances by opera singers from La Scala." But for all the grandeur of the preparations, the most remarkable aspect of the approaching wedding was the genuine love that everyone could see between the bride and groom. Vincent and Isidora were inseparable during the weeks leading up to their marriage, attending social functions together, taking daily rides in Hyde Park, and clearly delighting in each other's company. "I've never seen the Duke so happy," observed his longtime friend Lord Whitmore, as they watched Vincent and Isidora dance at yet another pre-wedding celebration. "He's like a different man, lighter, more open, more genuinely content than I've ever seen him." "Love has that effect on people," his wife replied with a romantic sigh, "and Miss Vale positively glows with happiness." Whatever people might say about the unconventional nature of their match, no one can deny that they're deeply in love. The night before the wedding, Vincent called on his Isidora for a private conversation in the drawing room of the elegant townhouse he had rented for her use during their engagement. Mrs. Whitfield discreetly withdrew to give them privacy, leaving the couple alone to share their thoughts and feelings on the eve of their marriage. "Are you nervous?" Vincent asked as they sat together on the silk-upholstered sofa, his hand gently holding hers. "Terrified?" Isidora admitted with a laugh. "Not about marrying you. That's the one thing I'm completely certain about. But about everything else, the ceremony, the reception, meeting all those important people, living up to the expectations that come with being your Duchess." "Isidora," Vincent said gently, turning to face her fully, "I need you to understand something. You don't need to live up to anyone's expectations except your own. You're not becoming my Duchess because you've proven yourself worthy of the title. You've been worthy all along. The title is simply catching up to your inherent value. You always know exactly what to say to make me feel better," Isidora said softly, her green eyes shining with love and gratitude. "I say what I believe to be true," Vincent replied. "Isidora, tomorrow you'll become my wife, but you've already become so much more than that. You've become my partner, my closest friend, my greatest source of joy and inspiration. Whatever challenges we face as Duke and Duchess, we'll face them together." "Together," Isidora repeated, savoring the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Vincent said, leaning closer to brush a gentle kiss across her lips. "And I promise you, my love, that no matter what tomorrow brings, no matter what society says or thinks, you'll never again have to face anything alone. From this moment forward, you'll always have me by your side." The wedding day dawned bright and clear, with London's finest weather providing a perfect backdrop for the ceremony that would unite the Duke of Alaric and his beloved bride. St. George's Handover Square was filled to capacity with guests representing the highest levels of British society, foreign nobility, and political dignitaries from across Europe. As Isidora prepared for the ceremony in the bridal suite that had been specially arranged for her use, she was surrounded by a team of attendants, ensuring that every detail of her appearance was perfect. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace, with a bodice that emphasized her graceful figure, and a train that would create a stunning visual as she walked down the aisle. You look like a fairy tale princess, said Lady Catherine Whitmore, who had agreed to serve as Isidora's matron of honor in the absence of close female relatives who supported the match. I feel like one, Isidora replied, studying her reflection in the mirror with wonder. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the invisible girl who had sat alone at Evangeline's wedding just months before. This woman was confident, radiant, and clearly beloved. Your Grace, said Mrs. Whitfield, using Isidora's soon-to-be title for the first time. It's time. The ceremony itself was magnificent, with every detail orchestrated to perfection. As Isidora walked down the aisle on the arm of Lord Whitmore, who had graciously agreed to give her away in the absence of her father, she could see Vincent waiting for her at the altar, resplendent in formal morning dress, and looking at her with such love and pride that it took her breath away. Dearly beloved, began the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had agreed to perform the ceremony as a mark of respect for Vincent's position and influence. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Vincent Edward Alaric, Duke of Alaric, and Isidora Margaret Vale in the bonds of holy matrimony. The vows they exchanged were traditional in form, but deeply personal in meaning. When Vincent promised to love, honor, and cherish Isidora for all the days of his life, his voice carried such conviction that several guests were moved to tears. When Isidora pledged to be his faithful wife and partner through all of life's joys and challenges, her words rang with the sincerity of a woman who had found her true calling. You may kiss the bride, the Archbishop announced, and Vincent's kiss was tender, passionate, and filled with the promise of a lifetime of love and devotion. As the newly married couple turned to face their guests as Duke and Duchess of Alaric, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The invisible girl who had once sat forgotten in corners had become the center of attention in the most positive way possible, surrounded by love, respect, and genuine celebration of her happiness. The wedding breakfast that followed was equally magnificent, held in the ballroom of Vincent's London mansion and featuring every luxury that money and taste could provide. The menu included delicacies from across Europe, wines from Vincent's private cellars, and a wedding cake that was itself a work of art. Your Grace, said the Prince Regent himself, as he approached the bride and groom during the reception, allow me to congratulate you on your marriage and to welcome the new Duchess to our circle. I predict great things for your union. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Isidora replied with a perfect curtsy, her training with Mrs. Whitfield serving her well in this most important moment. As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Vincent and Isidora found themselves surrounded by well wishes, congratulations, and expressions of genuine admiration for what they had accomplished together. The skeptics, who had predicted disaster, had been proven wrong, and even the most critical members of society had to admit that the new Duchess of Alaric was everything a duke's wife should be. I told you so, Lady Catherine Whitmore whispered to her husband as they watched the happy couple dance their first waltz as husband and wife. Love always finds a way to triumph over convention. Indeed it does, Lord Whitmore agreed, raising his glass in a silent toast to the power of seeing and being seen for who one truly is. As Vincent and Isidora swayed together on the dance floor, lost in each other's eyes and oblivious to the hundreds of guests watching their every move, they both knew that they had found something rare and precious. Their love story had begun with 6 simple words, "Stay close to me," but it had grown into something that would inspire others for generations to come. Are you happy? Vincent murmured as they danced, his gray eyes holding hers with the same intensity that had captivated her from their first meeting. Completely, Isidora replied, her voice filled with joy and wonder. Vincent, you've given me everything I never dared to dream of. Love, purpose, a place in the world where I belong. You've given me far more, Vincent said softly. You've given me a reason to be the best man I can be, a partner who challenges and inspires me, and a love that makes every day feel like a gift. As their wedding day drew to a close, and they prepared to begin their new life together as husband and wife, Vincent and Isidora knew that their love had already triumphed over every obstacle that society could place in their path. The Duke, who had chosen to see the invisible girl, had found in her not just a wife, but a true partner in every sense of the word. Their marriage would become a model for others, proving that love, based on genuine respect and admiration, could overcome any difference in social standing or circumstances. They would use their combined influence to champion causes they believed in, to help other young women find their voices and their places in the world, and to demonstrate that true nobility comes not from birth, but from character. The invisible girl who had sat alone at a wedding feast had become a duchess beloved by all who knew her. And the powerful duke who had said, "Stay close to me," had found in her the greatest treasure of his life. Their love story would be remembered not just for its romantic beginning, but for the lasting legacy of hope and inspiration. It provided to anyone who had ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or invisible. Love, they had proven, truly could conquer all, especially when it was built on the foundation of seeing and celebrating the authentic worth of another human being. And in a world often dominated by superficial considerations of wealth and status, their marriage stood as a shining example of what was possible when two people chose to value character over convention and love over social advantage. Vincent and Isadora's love story reminds us that true recognition, the act of truly seeing another person's worth, can be the most powerful gift we ever give or receive. When Vincent chose to notice Isadora sitting alone in that corner when he said those 6 life-changing words, "Stay close to me," he wasn't just offering protection from society's neglect. He was offering validation of her inherent worth as a human being. Their journey teaches us that invisibility is often not a choice, but a consequence of a world that values the wrong things. Isadora possessed intelligence, compassion, strength, and grace. But because she lacked wealth and connections, she was overlooked by a society that confused social position with personal value. Vincent's ability to see past these superficial markers to recognize her true worth is a reminder that the most extraordinary people are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with the wisdom to truly see them. Most importantly, their story demonstrates that love built on genuine recognition and respect can overcome any obstacle. Vincent didn't fall in love with Isadora despite her circumstances. He fell in love with her because of who she was as a person. Her lack of social standing didn't diminish her value. It simply meant that most people were too shallow to recognize what was right in front of them. Isadora's transformation from invisible wallflower to beloved duchess wasn't really a transformation at all. It was a revelation. She had always possessed the qualities that made her worthy of love and respect. She simply needed someone to see those qualities and reflect them back to her. Vincent's love didn't change who she was. It gave her the confidence to let her true self shine. Their love story also reminds us that true power lies not in dominating others, but in lifting them up. Vincent used his considerable influence not to control Isadora, but to protect and empower her. He created opportunities for her to succeed, surrounded her with support and guidance, and made it clear to everyone that her worth was not up for debate. May Vincent and Isadora's love inspire you to be both a seer and someone worthy of being seen. Look beyond the surface to recognize the extraordinary qualities that others might miss. And remember that your own worth is not determined by others' ability to recognize it. You are valuable simply because you exist, regardless of whether the world has learned to see that value yet. Remember, you have unique gifts and qualities that make you worthy of love and respect. You don't need to change who you are to deserve recognition. You simply need to find people with the wisdom to see who you truly are. And when you do find those people, hold on to them, because the ability to truly see and be seen is one of life's greatest treasures. The Duke who said, "Stay close to me," and the young woman who had the courage to accept his protection remind us all that love at first sight is really recognition at first sight. The soul deep knowing that you have found someone who sees you completely and loves you exactly as you are. Their story proves that when we choose to see others with the eyes of love rather than the lens of judgment, we create the possibility for miracles that can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. Subscribe for more captivating historical romances where invisible hearts are finally seen, where powerful protectors choose love over convention, and where 6 simple words can change everything. Discover stories that prove the greatest love stories begin with truly seeing another person's worth. Comment. What did you think of Vincent's decision to publicly defend Isadora? Have you ever had someone see your worth when others overlooked you, or been that person for someone else? Your next inspiring love story awaits. One where recognition becomes protection, protection becomes love, and love conquers every obstacle society can.